Hi there, we're going to talk about Illustrator 6 new feature of pattern making. So there's actually a panel now that we're going to use to build patterns. I have an orange slice vector piece of artwork here I'll click on. I'm going to go up to my object menu and I'm going to come down to pattern and I'm going to come over to make. Instantly Illustrator adds this orange slice vector piece of artwork to the swatches panel. And it says right over here, it's the new pattern. So as I work on this, Illustrator's watching me, and as soon as I click in the upper left here, done, then it will save what I have set up as my pattern in the swatches panel. Speaking of the panel option over here, I can give this a name. Let's just name this Orange 2. And down here you can see that you can actually tile your pattern. This is the grid, brick by row. Let me zoom out a little bit, Command or Control minus. You can see it a little bit better. And we've got brick by column and hex by row. So over here we can actually change the way that tile type is. So if we go ahead and do a grid situation here, just straight up and over, I have some width and height numbers here. Now what these are the blue area in the center determining what it's making for the pattern. Right now it's just using this single orange as the pattern. And if you keep an eye on this little swatch preview up here, you'll actually see this change. So with this width highlight, I'm going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard, my cursor arrow keys, and I'm going to run the number up. So you can see it's increasing that blue square area, which is bringing in more white space. So that's actually showing me how the pattern's going to look. It's going to have that additional white space. If I reduce this, then the pattern will overlap on top of itself. So the vector objects are overlapping on itself. Now here's a curious thing. Down here there's overlap, and it says by default the leftmost object is in front. So let me change this to right front. And then by default the top object is on top, or excuse me, the top object is in front. Let me put this back object in front. So the overlapping, you can control what objects are in the front or behind as you do an overlap. Also, if you want to see the pattern in different ways, here's a 9 by 9 of the pattern, a 5 by 3. So this just gives me the way to kind of preview this before I commit to it. So let's put it back to 5 by 5. And I can actually come up at the top up here in the upper left. There's a little item here called the Pattern Tile Tool. I'm going to click on that, and that allows me to take this blue grid box, we'll call it, and I can go in here and control how my pattern's being made also. So if I shrink this, of course now it's going to overlap these a little bit more. Bring this back out, and I can bring this down and over. So I can actually use this pattern tile tool to help me adjust how many objects are overlapping. Let me bring this to the center. So let's say we like this pattern. So what we're going to do is in the upper left corner here you have a couple of options. Save a copy, which means if you click this, it will save this pattern, put it into the swatch panel as it's set up, but it still keeps you in this area so you can work some more. So let's do that. Let's just say orange, whoops, there we go, orange 3, overlap, and I'll click OK. And that's been put into my swatch panel, but I'm still here able to work. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So if I want just this plain pattern, I can go ahead and I actually can go up and just click Done, and that's the way the Orange 2 pattern will look. Now things that I can do to this object here, I can go ahead and I can hold down my Alt or Option key and I can make another one. And let's say I make one like this. Now I'm going to take those three objects and I'll change maybe their blending modes. Let's say to darken. How about lighten? And how about a little overlay? So now I can use this as my pattern. So I'll take those objects, I'll go to the object menu, come down to pattern, make. It's going to automatically put that in the swatch panel. And then I can go ahead and maybe I'll change this one to maybe a brick by column. And then I can go up with my pattern tile tool. Remember before, you could go ahead and you could start to use this to manipulate how that pattern's being built. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click done. Now I'm going to look at that and say, maybe I'd like to change that a little bit. Can I double click on the pattern in the pattern panel? Can I go right back in here and manipulate and work a little bit more with this? Can I go back to my pattern tool? Can I spread this out a little bit? There. Maybe I'll use the way it looks here. Let me bring this over here. I was at my minimum pattern square there. There. So I can go ahead, I can click done. Now that will update that pattern. These objects here, I can go up to effects, I can go up here to stylize, and I can add a drop shadow to this one object. Click OK. I can take an object here and I can go up and add a different effect to it. Let's say I go up here and I distort it. I'll pick how about pucker and bloat? And notice in Illustrator 6 they've given us a preview now for a lot of these effects. I can go ahead and preview this ahead of time. And then if I want to go back, highlight this. In fact, why don't we take away these other objects and see what the pattern looks here. This looks pretty wild. Object, pattern, make. Click OK. And that looks pretty nice. I think I'll change this to a hexagonal pattern. And take my pattern tile tool here and expand this out a hair. There, maybe that's the pattern I would like. And I'll go ahead and I'll click done. So now with these patterns in here, let me go to my artboard and I'll go over here to an artboard 2. And this is just a template that comes with Illustrator here. I'm just going to take this object here and I'm going to fill it with one of my patterns. So I can pick swatches and I can pick here a new pattern. I'll drag this over on top. So it gives you quite a bit of flexibility here. Just to point out one thing you might not have known is that we could make patterns before and manipulate them. And this is what I want to remind you about. If you go over to your tool panel, let's say we come over here and we pick the rotation tool. Now I'm going to double click on it right here in the tool panel. And a technique we could use before was we can turn off the transformation of the t-shirt object and only transform the pattern. So now I can rotate this pattern right here. It would probably help if I clicked on it and selected it. What do you think? There we go. Now let's double click on the rotation tool and I'll go ahead and just transform the patterns here. In addition to that transform command, you can come over and pick the scale tool or any of these transformation tools. You double click them on the tool panel and you make sure it's only checked on transform patterns, and then I'll highlight uniform. I'm going to use my cursor arrow keys and I can move this up and down. And I can actually scale that. Of course, there's a non-uniform scale here. And I'll go ahead and click OK. So any of these transformation commands of rotate, skew, scale, mirror, these all can be used to just manipulate this pattern. Pretty cool. And then maybe I'll add a little text here. I'll take my type tool, click off this to deselect it, get out of isolation mode, and maybe I'll set my colors back to the default with a black fill. And I'll add some type on here of squeeze me, S-Q-U-E-E-Z me. And with this type picked here, I can take my selection arrow, select this, move it around of course, and then up in the control panel on top, there's a little paragraph with alignments up here, but right next to it is the make envelope command that's been in Illustrator a long time. And I'm going to use the actual option of warp option of squeeze, and I can go ahead and go in here and manipulate my text here a little bit. Click OK. Go to my transform. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Shift Alt or Shift Option, make it a little bit bigger, and maybe rotate it a little bit here. So there you go. There's the new pattern tool within Illustrator CS6. You start out with a piece of vector artwork or a combination of pieces of vector artwork. You go right ahead, you pick that pattern, and what you can actually do is once you select that artwork, you just go ahead, go under Object, to Pattern, Make, it adds it to the panel, swatches panel, and then go ahead and manipulate the different tools, especially using this pattern tile tool here.